Galileo Galilei. Galileo Galilei was an Italian astronomer, physicist, and mathematician born on February 15, 1564, in Pisa, Italy. He was the oldest of 6 children and was raised by his father, Vincenzo Galilei, a musician and music theorist, and his mother, Giulia Ammannati. Galileo showed an aptitude for mathematics and science at an early age and was sent to study medicine at the University of Pisa in 1581. While at the University of Pisa, Galileo became interested in mathematics and physics and began conducting experiments. One of his early experiments involved dropping objects of different weights from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to test Aristotle's theory that heavier objects fall faster than lighter objects. Galileo's experiments proved that Aristotle's theory was incorrect and that objects of different weights fall at the same rate. After leaving the University of Pisa, Galileo became a professor of mathematics at the University of Padua in 1592. While at Padua, he continued his experiments and research in physics and astronomy, including the development of the telescope, which he used to observe the heavens. In 1609, Galileo published Sidereus Nuncius, which described his observations of the moon, the stars, and the planets through his telescope. His observations challenged the prevailing Aristotelian and Ptolemaic views of the universe, which held that the Earth was at the center of the universe and that the moon, sun, and planets orbited around it. Galileo's observations showed that the moon had mountains and craters, that the Milky Way was composed of countless stars, and that Jupiter had 4 moons orbiting it. Galileo's discoveries caused a stir in the scientific community and the Catholic Church, which had long held that the Earth was the center of the universe. Galileo was called to Rome in 1616 to defend his views before the Inquisition, which ruled that his ideas were foolish and absurd and that he should abandon them. Galileo continued his research and observations, and in 1632, he published Dialogue concerning the 2 chief world systems, which presented arguments for and against the heliocentric view of the universe. The book was seen as a direct challenge to the Church's authority, and Galileo was summoned to Rome to stand trial for heresy. Galileo was found guilty and sentenced to house arrest for the remainder of his life. During his house arrest, he continued to work on his scientific and mathematical ideas, including the laws of motion and the concept of inertia. He died on January 8, 1642, at the age of 77. Here is some more detail about Galileo Galilei's life. After completing his studies in Pisa, Galileo became a mathematics tutor, teaching students at the University of Pisa and the University of Florence. He was later appointed as a mathematics professor at the University of Pisa in 1589 but left after just 3 years due to conflicts with the university administration. Galileo's telescope was a significant contribution to the field of astronomy. He made his first telescope in 1609 by grinding a convex lens and a concave lens, which he used to observe the night sky. He later made telescopes with increasingly higher magnification, allowing him to make detailed observations of the moon, the phases of Venus, and the moons of Jupiter. Galileo's work on the laws of motion and the concept of inertia was a significant contribution to the field of physics. He developed the idea that an object in motion will continue in motion unless acted upon by an external force, which became known as the law of inertia. This idea was further developed by Isaac Newton in his work on mechanics. In addition to his scientific work, Galileo was also a prolific writer. He wrote on a variety of topics, including music theory, mathematics, and science. His works were often written in Italian rather than Latin, which was the language of scholars at the time, making them more accessible to the general public. Galileo's trial and house arrest had a significant impact on his health. He suffered from various ailments, including a heart condition, rheumatism, and arthritis, which made it difficult for him to move around. Despite this, he continued to work on his scientific and mathematical ideas, corresponding with other scholars and conducting experiments in his home. Galileo's father, Vincenzo Galilei, was a well-known musician and music theorist who had a significant influence on his son's early education. Vincenzo was interested in mathematics and physics and often engaged in discussions with his son on these topics, helping to foster Galileo's interest in science. Galileo had 3 children with Marina Gamba, whom he met while teaching at the University of Padua. Their first child, Virginia, was born out of wedlock and later became a nun. Their second child, Livia, also became a nun, and their third child, Vincenzo, became a lute player. In addition to his work on astronomy and physics, Galileo also made significant contributions to the development of the thermometer. He designed a device that used the expansion and contraction of air to measure temperature, which he called the thermoscope. This device was later modified by other scientists to create the first modern thermometers. Galileo was a controversial figure in his time, not only because of his scientific ideas but also because of his blunt and confrontational personality. He often got into arguments with other scholars and was not afraid to criticize the church and its teachings. His outspokenness led to conflicts with powerful figures, including Pope Urban VIII, who was once a close friend and supporter of Galileo. Despite his conflicts with the church, Galileo remained a devout Catholic throughout his life. He saw his work as a way to uncover the secrets of God's creation and believed that science and religion could coexist. However, his views on the relationship between science and religion were often misunderstood and led to further controversy. Galileo's observations of the moons of Jupiter were a groundbreaking discovery in astronomy. He discovered that there were 4 moons orbiting Jupiter, which he named the Medicean stars after his patron, Cosimo II de' Medici. This discovery provided evidence for the Copernican model of the solar system, which stated that the planets orbited the Sun, rather than the Earth being at the center of the universe. Galileo was not the only astronomer to observe the moons of Jupiter, but he was the first to publish his findings and to explain their significance. His work on the moons of Jupiter was a significant contribution to the field of astronomy and helped to establish the importance of observational evidence in scientific discovery. Galileo's book Dialogue concerning the 2 chief world systems was a controversial work that was critical of the geocentric model of the universe. The book was written in the form of a conversation between 3 characters, one of whom advocated for the Copernican model of the solar system. The book was seen as a direct challenge to the Church's teachings and led to Galileo's trial and condemnation for heresy. During his trial, Galileo was forced to recant his belief in the heliocentric model of the solar system and was placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life. Despite the restrictions placed upon him, Galileo continued to correspond with other scholars and to work on his scientific ideas. Galileo's work on the tides was another significant contribution to the field of physics. He observed that the tides were caused by the gravitational pull of the moon and the sun, rather than the motion of the earth. This idea was later developed by Isaac Newton, who used it as evidence for his law of universal gravitation. In addition to his scientific pursuits, Galileo was also an accomplished writer and poet. He wrote several treatises on the subject of military engineering, including a book on the design and construction of fortifications. He also wrote a number of poems in Italian and Latin, many of which were dedicated to his patrons or friends. Galileo's contributions to the field of astronomy extended beyond his work on the moons of Jupiter. He also observed the phases of Venus, which he used as evidence to support the heliocentric model of the solar system. His observations of the sunspots provided further evidence that the sun was not a perfect, unchanging celestial body. Despite his house arrest, Galileo remained a respected and influential figure in the scientific community. His correspondence with other scientists and thinkers was extensive, and he continued to receive visitors at his home. Many of his ideas and discoveries were published posthumously, and his work continued to inspire scientific research and innovation for centuries to come. In addition to his scientific and literary pursuits, Galileo was also an accomplished musician. He played the lute and sang, and he was known to have composed several pieces of music. He believed that music was a fundamental aspect of the universe and that its harmony and beauty could be explained through the laws of physics and mathematics. Galileo's influence on the development of modern science cannot be overstated. His work on the laws of motion, the nature of gravity, and the behavior of light laid the groundwork for the work of later scientists such as Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and Max Planck. His ideas challenged the established order of the time and helped to usher in a new era of scientific discovery and inquiry. Galileo's father, Vincenzo Galilei, was a musician and music theorist, and he encouraged his son's early interest in music. Galileo was trained in the lute and played in courtly settings during his youth. His interest in mathematics and physics emerged later in his life, after he had already made a name for himself as a musician.
Galileo's relationship with the church was complex and nuanced.
He was a devout Catholic and believed that his scientific work was not in conflict with his faith. However, his willingness to challenge church doctrine and his insistence on empirical evidence often put him at odds with church officials.
Despite his condemnation for heresy, Galileo maintained his Catholic faith until the end of his life.
Galileo's work on the laws of motion and the nature of gravity laid the foundation for the development of modern physics. His experiments with inclined planes and falling objects helped to demonstrate the fundamental principles of motion and acceleration, and his observations of the moons of Jupiter provided evidence for the Copernican model of the solar system. Galileo's house arrest, which lasted from 1633 until his death in 1642, was not as restrictive as is often assumed. He was allowed to continue his scientific work and to correspond with other scholars, and he was visited by many of his friends and supporters.
However, his confinement did limit his ability to travel and to engage in public discourse. Galileo's ideas and discoveries were not universally accepted during his lifetime.
Many of his contemporaries, including Johannes Kepler, initially rejected his observations of the moons of Jupiter and his support for the Copernican model of the solar system. It was only after the publication of his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems that Galileo's ideas began to gain wider acceptance.
Galileo's final years were marked by declining health and increasing isolation.
He was largely confined to his home during his house arrest and was unable to travel or meet with other scholars. He continued to correspond with colleagues and work on his ideas until his death in 1642. Galileo's legacy has continued to inspire scientists and scholars over the centuries. His ideas and discoveries laid the foundation for modern astronomy, physics, and mathematics, and his advocacy for empirical observation and experimentation helped shape the scientific method that is still used today. Galileo Galilei is remembered today as one of the most important figures in the history of science, whose ideas and discoveries paved the way for the scientific revolution and our modern understanding of the universe. In conclusion, Galileo Galilei was a brilliant scientist, mathematician, philosopher, and musician who made significant contributions to our understanding of the universe. He challenged established beliefs and traditions, often at great personal risk, in his quest for truth and empirical evidence.
His observations of the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the behavior of light revolutionized our understanding of the solar system and the nature of the universe.
Galileo's work laid the foundation for modern physics and astronomy and helped to usher in a new era of scientific discovery and inquiry.
Despite his condemnation for heresy and subsequent house arrest, Galileo remained a devout Catholic and continued to pursue his scientific work until the end of his life.
His legacy continues to inspire and inform scientific research and innovation to this day.
Thank you for watching.
If you would like to obtain the documents that contain the texts we use in the videos, please help us with a subscription on our Patreon page.
You will also help us to continue making more videos. Learning personal development will give you peace and well-being in your life. Please subscribe and give it a like if you liked it. Don't forget to check the video description to find more information that may interest you. Learn English with personal development. Goodbye.